Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second event of the COI Talk series. I am your host, Gina So, and if you haven't seen me before from yesterday, welcome to the talks. And don't worry, if you missed the talks from yesterday, all the talks were recorded and will be posted on our Instagram at Cleaner Oceans Inst, so be on the lookout for that. And as you may already know, since you signed up for the event, we are continuing with the COI Sustainability Tech event with my last guest speakers from the Knowledge Society. And I want to repeat that the speakers and I worked really hard on this to put this event together. So I really appreciate the speakers here for making time to come to the event. Also appreciate you guys for coming to the event to teach, connect, and inspire. So claps for everyone. And before we start, listeners who are tuning in, feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout the talk. And at the end of each talk, we will leave 3 to 6 minutes to answer any questions. And you also have the option to pick up the mic, which we didn't really use yesterday, but totally fine. And you'll be able to speak. You also have the option to throw some claps, light bulbs, and other reactions, which I see that everyone kind of already figured out. And that's located on, I believe, your bottom right. And make sure to do that to send energy, enthusiasm, and support for the speakers. And so, with our first speaker, now introducing our speaker, Kawtar. So Kawtar is a 15-year-old from Ontario, and her talk will focus on how cow poop, yes, cow poop, can actually revolutionize our electricity. And I know this is going to be a really interesting talk, so let's just jump right into it.
Okay, thank you, Gina, for that introduction. Okay, so this is the Williams family. They own a farm close by, but the parents soon realized that their lifestyle would not be sustainable in terms of profit, meaning they would not be able to survive with the amount of money that they had. In their farm, they also experienced a little inconvenience. The poop that comes from their cows is used as fertilizer for their crops, but because of the large amount, they are frequently growing impatient with what they're going to do with it. Now, I want to ask you, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you think of renewable energy? I'll give you all 3 seconds. Well, I'd guess that it was most likely solar panels, windmills, etc. But a lot of people are missing out on an important one. Cow poop. Yep, you heard me right, cow poop. Farmers can profit from cow poop and save money by converting it to electricity. So you might be wondering, Kawtar, what do you mean cow poop can be turned into energy? Do explain. So let's get right into it. There are 3 methods that entail how cow poop can create electricity. Number 1, biodigesters. Number 2, incineration. And number 3, anaerobic digestion. Let's start with the most common method, biodigesters. They're utilized to digest the organic matter biologically. Does that sound like a clump of biology terms? Here's something else to think about. A tank with teeth as sharp as a shark that consumes feces to spew fertilizer and biogas out of its ears as a result. Of course, this picture is an oversimplification of the actual processes involved. The manure, so the poop, is first fed into a system sink, goes through pipes into a biodigester, then to turn it into biogas, bacteria/microorganisms start to digest and break down the organic matter by fermentation. But what is fermentation? Fermentation is the chemical process whereby molecules such as sugar or glucose disintegrate anaerobically, meaning in the absence of oxygen. This procedure is super important in biodigesters because without them, no biogas composes. So in a sense, fermentation is like the mother of the biogas while fertilizer is adopted. In short, sugar is broken down without oxygen to create biogas. You might be wondering, well, why are biodigesters in closed tanks? Since this is an anaerobic procedure, again without oxygen, we can't let any O2 enter through this process. The tank has to be put underground and made with a material that confines all of the manure. So what can be used for this process? Concrete. After being put in the digester, the bacteria breaks down the organic matter in the waste. Not to mention, cow manure isn't the only thing that can be broken down in the digester. Rotten vegetables, such as old vegetable lettuce, is also a great alternative since it contains a lot of sugar. When the microorganisms are finished with their lunch, what is left is biogas and a mix of around 60% of methane. Red flags must be popping out of your head when you hear methane. However, number one, the methane gas is not emitted into the atmosphere. It's collected into an engine and then converted into power. Even though it is a gas, meaning it has dispersed molecules or particles that will want to take as much space as possible, a confined pipe from the digester sends methane to an engine to create power and heat. We also need to make the distinction between methane and biomethane. Firstly, biomethane is produced from fresh organic material, so cow poop, lettuce, vegetables, etc. Also, biomethane is a direct result of the cow manure digestion. While methane, on the other hand, a natural gas, is clutching onto fossil fuels for dear life. Since fossil fuels create a lot of greenhouse gases, it's overall not sustainable for the environment. Think of methane like a lazy uncle that likes to take space on couches and it's up to no good when it's outside. So it's then confined to pipes and tanks to avoid mishap. Biodigesters might be able to control the laziness of Uncle Methane, but they prove to be very, very expensive. In fact, building a biodigester costs $1.1 million. But the return saves farmers $152,000 a year, meaning if you do the math, it'll take about 7.5 years to get the initial amount back. While it may be very costly, in the long run, it's a good investment in terms of savings. Now, what might biogas mean? Biogas is essentially a mixture of methane, carbon dioxide, and little quantities of other gases produced by anaerobic digestion of organic matter in an oxygen-free environment. After the biodigester converts the waste into specifically biomethane, that biomethane is able to activate a modified natural gas engine. So we can see in the image here, and this is an engine that specializes in these gases. After that, it starts spinning an electrical generator and as a result creates electricity. Next, let's hop onto incineration. This method dates back to centuries ago. It's the burning of biomass, so anything organic that can be used as fuel to create power and heat. The cow poop is firstly dried, and this ensures that we can get the maximum amount of energy since moisture/wetness decreases energy potential of manure. Whatever fume that results is applied to a production called cogeneration. I know, a lot of new terms, but cogeneration is when two energy sources are being produced by one single fuel source. There are also some ashes that persist. So instead of simply throwing them out like the ashes they are, they can be used as fertilizer in farms. With that being said, we can evidently see that this procedure is extremely versatile. Finally, we'll end our train of knowledge to anaerobic digestion. Anaerobic digestion, or AD, is a commercial technology with operational projects all over the world, and it converts organics such as manure and food waste into biogas and digestate. And digestate just means any material remaining. Now, what might be the benefits? Number one, since methane is a greenhouse gas that is 21 times worse than CO2 over a time period of 100 years, the anaerobic digestion ensures to keep it contained and out of the atmosphere. Number two, unlike solar and wind, biogas is a storable form of renewable energy that can be used when the energy is needed. And number three, remember when we talked about digestate? Well, we can create a nutrient-rich digestate, and it will return carbon and nutrients back into the soil. But why is poop specifically used? Is it because the process of fermentation breaks down glucose and sugar goes into your poop? If so, why don't we just put powders of sugar in the tank so that the microorganisms can digest it and convert it to methane and biogas? Manure is a waste product, and using it to make biogas is a great way to add value to the product, create energy, and reduce methane emissions that would otherwise escape into the atmosphere, or else it would stay as a big pile of inconvenience for the farmers. Sure, powdered sugar could be used to make biogas, but there are many other higher value options for sugar, like food. When looking at what to feed a digester, the plant operator has to consider what is consistently available and its proximity to the digester for practicality. If we use these methods, not only can families of farmers like the Williams family generate revenue and create savings, but our world can become way more sustainable and clean from just the feces of a cow. Thank you.
Woo! Oh my God, that was a great talk. Oh my gosh. Yes, everyone's loving it. Absolutely. Yes, that was absolutely amazing. And I'm sure no one could have really talked about poop so positively and interestingly. And I'm sure the audience are quite shocked about that if they have never heard of using cow poop to revolutionize our energy. And so thank you so much. And remember, audience, you can drop your questions in the chat, and I'll leave a moment for that. Leave reactions, and I see everyone's just doing an amazing job as an audience. But yes, we're going to wait a little bit for questions to come in. But yeah. And if you guys do have questions that come up after Kawtar's talk, totally fine, Kawtar. You could directly interact with your audience and answer their questions in the chat. But yeah, if there are no questions so far, we can head on to our next speaker, Aryan. So yeah, Aryan is a 15-year-old from Connecticut, and his talk will be about how artificial intelligence can help fight against climate change. So let's see what he has to say about that. Aryan, take the stage.
Great, thank you so much, Gina. Hopefully everybody can see that. Okay, great, thank you. So in the audience down below, I've been seeing a couple of my friends attending, which is great. But I also want to introduce you guys to another one of my friends. And his name is Deer. Deer is a 65-year-old farmer who's from a place called Khulna, Bangladesh, a small country in Asia. Khulna's way of living is as a farmer. Deer's way of Deer farms rice crops with the rest of his family, and then goes to the city center to sell these crops to make a living and feed the rest of his family. Also on weekends, Deer loves to play card games with his friends and family. But on August 8th, 2020, disaster struck. Excess water flooded a local dam, causing tons of water to overflow into the local area. This ruined the crops of farms of 500 to 600 families, including those just like Deer's. These families lost their main way of creating money, and they can't really support their families anymore because they lost their crops. And this isn't just a problem for Khulna. It's a problem for the whole country of Bangladesh. But what's the larger issue of this whole problem? Well, this brings us to climate change. But what is climate change? Climate change is mainly based off three main gases, or greenhouse gases. These gases include carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and what these gases are really good at doing is holding and storing energy. When sunlight hits these gases, they absorb that energy from the sunlight and store it as heat. And as more and more of these gases reach the atmosphere, there are more and more heat-retaining gases, allowing for a warmer Earth. If we look at this graph right here, we can see how the global temperature is being compared to time. As we already know, as time goes on, more and more of these greenhouse gases are put into the air. And from our previous knowledge of greenhouse gases holding heat, this actually proves how greenhouse gases actually warm the Earth. And we can see the slow, steady incline of the global temperature. But what's the problem with global warming? Doesn't it just mean more summer days? Well, there are a ton of things that global warming actually affects, but one of the big things is with glaciers. Glaciers are large masses of ice or frozen water that are on land, and that's the important part, that they're on land. When the temperature increases, the ice melts, and this turns the frozen water which is on land into liquid water that is in the ocean. And as we add water into the ocean, that raises the sea level. With this graph here, it shows how, according to time, the sea level actually increases, and we can see the steady increase as time, and also the predictions. This graph actually shows an intermediate prediction of around 1 meter of sea level increase, which is around 3 feet. So taking that statistic, let's compare it back to Bangladesh. What happens if there's a 3-foot increase in sea level rise by 2100? How's that going to affect the country? Well, that's going to displace 30 million people, causing them to lose their homes, belongings, and be forced to move. And on top of that, that's 20% of the whole country being submerged, just from some water rising. And it's not just a problem for Bangladesh either. It's a problem for the entire Earth. We already went over how heat and rising sea levels will affect this. But what about the coral reefs that are going to be destroyed that are so pivotal to our oceanic ecosystems? And what about the increase of the effectiveness and making these hurricanes stronger? They're going to destroy so many more homes and create so many more problems. And let's not even talk about the wildfires that are taking place. From the beginning of 2020, we already learned about the havoc that the Australian wildfires caused. And how about the smoke that the Californian wildfires have caused across the past decades? Scientists have actually predicted that around 250,000 deaths will occur just because of climate change every single year. And on top of that, 1.2 billion people will lose their home and be forced to move elsewhere because of so many different issues all related to climate change. So what are the solutions? We already know that this is a huge problem, and it's very proven with science and other different studies. Well, the first one is with solar panels. We're very aware of how solar panels are actually very eco-friendly. You've probably seen these solar panels on your neighbor's home or in any elsewhere areas. Solar panels absorb the energy from the sunlight and use different ways of chemistry and otherwise technologies to take that and use it as electricity, and that's obviously very eco-friendly. Then we also have an emerging technology of nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion at the most basic level just works with two atoms being combined together, and when they combine, they let out a ton of energy. This is also super eco-friendly as it doesn't release many or if any at all greenhouse gases. And then thirdly, we have electric vehicles, and also, once again, super obvious compared to combustion engines, which literally let out greenhouse gases as they go. Electrical vehicles just use their battery of electricity, and that's the greenhouse gas situation with that. But even with all of these technologies, innovation is still not fast enough. With a report from the IEA, they show the current status of climate tech solutions based on the power of the solution itself and how it can impact with reducing greenhouse gases. And how these solutions affect the greenhouse gas reduction, they have them categorized into different statuses of how their solution is being used around the world. Like mature and early adoption ones are solutions that are really widely used or starting to be used. Demonstration and prototype are much earlier in that timeline. And what we really need to do, and what the IEA is telling us, is that we need to move those solutions that are in the prototype demonstration area up into the mature and early adoption area. Or else these solutions that have the ability to save and stop greenhouse gases won't be used by enough people, and therefore we won't meet our quota of greenhouse gas prevention. So here's the big question. How do we speed up innovation? Well, to do this, we need to think a little outside of the box. Be a little creative, per se. And how do we do this? Well, most of you are actually using this technology right now, but with computers. But it's not just computers either. It's one step farther. It's with AI. But what is AI? We've seen AI in so many different things. It's almost like a buzzword that we use on articles or different technologies to make them sound cooler. But AI is a technology that can perform actions similar to human intelligence. And there are many types of AI, such as machine learning, NLPs, and computer vision. And let's go through each of them. So machine learning is an algorithm that can improve without human intervention. When we compare machine learning to traditional programming, we actually get a lot of new insights. Such as with traditional programming, we have rules that we want the computer to follow, and we also have data or inputs that we want to put in to get answers out. For machine learning, we have answers that we already have, we have data or inputs that we want to put in, and we're trying to deduce the processes that the machine does or the rules. Now we have some popular uses of machine learning. There are tons of uses, but these are some of them. Such as Spotify. Spotify tries to learn and understand what type of music and genres you like, and then they use them in their own machine learning technology. Then as if you start clicking or not clicking a specific genre or piece of music, Spotify will learn that and change how they recommend their music next. Same thing with Netflix. Netflix sees what type of movies you like, what genres and what lengths and what type of TV shows, and they try to predict which ones you want to see. If you choose that prediction or not choose a prediction, they'll see the error rate and they'll try and fix and find out better movies to recommend to you. Now let's learn about NLPs, or natural language processing. This is a subset of AI that understands and uses the data of natural language. So let's look at this little piece of text of something from a customer. Well, what NLPs are able to do is not just understand the things like nouns or adjectives or parts of speech, but they can actually understand what the text means. Here we have a sentence from a customer, and they have some terms like intuitive platform, definitely recommend, chat support, excellent, fast. NLPs are able to understand what these words mean and phrases mean, and they're able to use three terms, or three phrases: usability, positive, customer support. A whole machine was able to use this text and understand what it means, which is insane. NLPs are used in an array of things, and one of them is with something like spam folders. Let's say some Nigerian prince tries to ask you for some money to start his gold collection. NLPs will actually read through that email and find out that it's spam and put it in your spam folder. Then we have things like voice assistants like Siri or Amazon Alexa. These voice assistants will actually listen to what you're saying and try and find out what you're saying to try and give the information that you're trying to ask for. Then we have computer vision, which is my personal favorite technology. Computer vision are algorithms that are able to read/classify images. And the main technology that is involved with computer vision is our convolutional neural networks, or CNNs. CNNs work by taking an image and trying to convert those pixels through a couple of different processes into a bunch of data. And CNNs are able to read these images through different ways, such as like detecting vertical lines, horizontal lines, very light, very dark areas, many things like that. Now we have one example of computer vision, autonomous vehicles. Computer vision is able to understand what these vehicles are, such as the speed or what the vehicles are, detecting what they are in general, finding the speed, if they're stationary or moving, and many other different attributes like that. Then we also have a really cool technology, or not necessarily technology, but a really cool use of CNNs or computer vision. Amazon's trying to make a new marketplace or grocery store where they use cameras to see what type of objects you put in or don't put in your baskets, and therefore they're trying to revolutionize marketplaces with that. Now here's a huge question. How do we use AI to work on climate change? Climate change seems like such a demanding issue. It demands really real-world solid objects like nuclear fusion, batteries, and EVs, whereas artificial intelligence is really just a technology that mainly stored on computers. Well, our friends at Climate Change AI have actually deduced a ton of different ways that AI can actually impact climate change. And many of these are electrical parts, transportation, industry, but there's so many more. So let's go through electrical systems, or mainly electrical grids. As you try and expand our production of energy, these usually always go back to electric grids and how they are managed. So, for example, we have variable sources, which are when we have many different types of sources of energy and we're trying to switch between them. So, by using machine learning, we can help try and deal with the buffer, because usually when we switch between these, we have a buffer or spinning reserve, which is usually powered by coal or natural gas. Machine learning can help buffer through the switch in addition to reducing the emissions from the generators when we're choosing between these sources. Then we have controllable sources, which are sources where machine learning can help find high efficiency ways in managing how they work. In addition, using computer vision to monitor how the source is working well. Then we have machine learning with nuclear fusion development. Machine learning can help guide designing the experiments of nuclear fusion development while also trying to see how the structure responds before actually engaging in the experiment. And then we have microgrids. Microgrids are small electrical grids for rural areas, and these aren't really usually very efficient, therefore wasting tons of greenhouse gases. So machine learning can actually help these small microgrids by making the electrical connections and obtaining different things to make them more efficient. Then we have transportation. So for transport activity, just like day-to-day going around, machine learning can help optimize vehicle routing of how you go and where you go to make sure that you use less greenhouse gases. We have autonomous vehicles, which are able to use machine learning to help design driving style, routing, and many other things to make sure you minimize greenhouse gas emissions and other things like that. Then we have the modal shift, which is just machine learning optimizing public transport. Let's say, for example, that during certain times of day, location A had tons of demand, and during other times of day, location B had tons of demand. Machine learning can actually learn the trends behind this, so then people can actually use the proper logistics of placing transport vehicles in the right areas, so then we use the So then we are able to try and minimize greenhouse gases through those methods. And then we have electrical vehicles. AI can use machine learning to optimize energy charging, battery usage to lessen greenhouse gas usage. Well, so far we went over some of the pretty normal and I'd say redundant ways of using AI on climate change. Just finding different ways, finding optimization areas, and finding ways that we can reduce greenhouse gases in the smallest areas. But here's the golden part. AI and climate change really demands tons of creativity. And this is one example that I found was super creative. The one of using AI to handle data centers. Data centers usually demand tons of energy to operate. On top of that, they produce so much heat that they need a ton of energy to cool them as well. So what's one company that you think has a ton of data centers? That's obviously Google. Google partnered with their subsidiary, DeepMind, which works on AI, to find out how they can use AI to reduce their environmental impact. DeepMind used machine learning to optimize their cooling system. The company looked through a bunch of different parts of how their data centers work. So their data centers have a bunch of inputs where they can read different sensors, alarms, conditions, loads, etc. And they also have a bunch of actions that they can work on, such as designating pressure, designating the pump load, designating valves, and things like that. So DeepMind used their machine learning processes and made something off that. Then they executed on the actual data centers themselves. So here we have a graph of the power usage throughout when there's machine learning control on and when it's off. And you can visibly see a huge drop compared when machine learning control is on of these data centers and their cooling systems. And that's a 40% reduction in energy storage. Just using some software that a couple of guys made and uploading to a system, they're able to achieve a massive drop in energy usage. Think about that. That's software causing 40% reduction in energy usage. Just software. Here's another example of how AI can help with climate change, and this is actually on a different side. And this is the part on not mitigating climate change, but actually adapting it. So here we have a seemingly fun robot that's driving through some crops, and seems kind of large when you look at that and compare it against a human. Well, that's the next invention from Google X, which is Mineral. Mineral is a robot that helps farmers understand their crops. The robot drives through the fields and has a camera underneath that takes pictures along the way. For example, here's one of the pictures. You can see the nice green plant, some dead parts to the right side, and some dead parts of the plant on the bottom, along with the dirt, of course. Now look at this. Using AI computer vision, we can analyze the actual image to find out valuable information. We can see how much of this is actually green, healthy plant, how much of it is dead, and compared to other different things. And on top of that, we can actually create 3D models of the plant. Now think of this. Just analyzing the color and the health of the plant, in addition to 3D models, can help farmers get tons of data to learn how to manage their crops better. They can find out things like if it needs more water, more sunlight, if they're growing right, wrong time to grow, things like that, tons of weed. And by doing this and getting this data from computer vision and AI, farmers will better understand how to adapt to the new climate of farming. Climate change obviously has a huge effect on farming, especially. There's no matter how much work we do, there's always going to be an effect on climate change, on farming as well. The crops that we grow will always be impacted. So this is a huge way of trying to adapt with that whole process. So now we learn how cool AI is on climate change, the new ways of being creative, and the impact of this. So how do people like you and me, students, learn about this? Well, the first step is to learn Python, the most used language when it comes to machine learning and AI. Second step is to start a course on machine learning or AI on deep learning from Udemy, Udacity, or Coursera, so you get the basics down. The third step is to start reading research papers. Although it may seem intimidating, research papers will give you superpower findings in AI and climate change. And when they come out, you can stay on top of the game of what's coming out. Next step is to collaborate with others. There are tons of online communities like Kaggle, Stack Overflow, Reddit, and Work on Climate Slack, where you can talk and learn about different AI and climate change problems, especially as the field is evolving so fast. And this is, in my opinion, the most important quality you need. The true strength of AI and climate change is when we use creativity. The whole basis of AI and climate change is creative. No one thinks of using software to tackle a large problem that's usually demanding such large and solid object that we see in the world. Like nuclear fusion reactors and battery technology, those seem so large and so solid in front of us that we need mechanical engineers and electrical energies. And AI is just some code on a computer that you can upload. And that's a creativity that you can actually use to impact. The most creative answers are the ones that are most effective as seen with the Google data answers and the MinRobot. So I hope you take these qualities in hand and find a cool, new, weird way to involve two unrelated topics into a superpower to help people like Deer. Thank you so much.
Yay! Thank you so much for the awesome talk. So right now, from cow poop to AI ready, all the talks were spectacular, and the information in your talk was so in depth and just was delivered so beautifully. And I personally really love your deck as well. And so, any questions from the audience? We'll give it a minute. I did ask a question earlier, which you kind of answered, but I'm sure you can add on and drop any more tips for starters. So I basically asked, how are you able to approach and pick up on AI and become interested in that area? And like, what tips for starters would you drop for the people here?
So I'm like personally very much in the beginner area. Like I've literally made my first neural network like a month ago. So I'd say for learning AI, it's a very long journey. It's going to be tough, I guess, just learning as much as possible from these courses and getting those basics down, and then exploring on your way from your own curiosity. Like I've gone through different meetings of asking different people, where should I go with AI? And they've told me about different ways and different processes. As AI is so broad that you sort of need to minimize on a different area to like make sure you learn it right. So I'm trying to minimize on the computer vision part because I'm really interested on remote imaging, because I think that's a really solid way where we can use remote imaging and understand what's in those images to find out how we can use that for climate change studying or changing. So just finding out a niche topic and just going really far with collaboration is, I'd say, a really good idea.
Yeah. So we have a question from Qatar, and she asked, what do you think, right? What would AI be without creativity? I'm sure answers might vary, but from your perspective, what do you think?
It would be really, really boring and really, really lame. So as I've seen, like through those first couple of examples of the electrical and transportation, I tried to include those because those are very strong and pivotal, I guess, ways of using technology, but they are not as impactful as the latter two case studies of the robot and the data centers, because the first section is just based on optimizing and trying to reduce places. It's looking at those little corners that you can go through and just doing small adjustments, and that's where it is. Because at some point with AI, it's very limited as usual. It's the whole technology itself still has tons of limitations based on where it can go. So there's not too much of an expectation you can have on those small things. But when you use them in really, really creative areas like the data centers or the robot, and using them in executions that you wouldn't really think of, we can get much stronger results.
Yeah, and I'm sure like AI itself can be helpful, but I think our society needs to focus on how can we use it to optimize, but also make sure it doesn't become too powerful to the point where, it's related to overpowering humans themselves and creating superhumans, super robots. But I think in this case, when you talk about, using AI to combat climate change is a really important like issue. And I think AI does have so much potential in doing that. So yeah. And so thank you for the talk. It was so informational and I learned so much. So yeah, if any of the audience do have more questions, you could drop them and he can answer directly in the chat. So you have that option. And yeah, so without further ado, we're going to move on to our second speaker. And so welcome, Kimberly. Kimberly is a 16-year-old from Ottawa trying to enhance our agricultural system, and she works on improving the sustainability of our food chain with the use of cellular agriculture, which she will be talking about. And so yeah, Kimberly, take the mic.
Great. Thanks for that introduction. Okay. I want to show you two things that you've definitely experienced in your life. One that you will probably love, and the other one that you will probably hate. But let's start positive and start with the one you will love, and that is food.
No matter what diet you follow, I think we can all agree that food is an essential part of our lives. All the burgers, fries, sandwiches, hot dogs, salads, strawberries, the list goes on and on. But essentially, food is both amazing and comforting. And now, there's something that you will hate. And these are the kind of people I like to call vacuum friends. The kind that keep bugging you for pencils, who lose all their stuff, and who forget to bring food to a potluck dinner. Yeah, I know, we all don't like these kind of friends. But back in school, I used to be asked all the time, "Hey, Kim, can I borrow a pencil? Oh, and while I'm at it, can I also use your eraser? Oh, and your calculator too?" But then minutes later, you come back only to find that they lost all your stuff. And me trying to be the helpful person that I am, I let this happen time and time again. Out of the 100 pencils that I gave out every school year, I probably only got 3 back. And I remember being kind of ticked off and wondering, where the heck are my 97 other pencils? But other than me, no one else was upset. But this is the exact same situation that is happening in our food system, specifically with meat. Cows are the vacuum friends of our agriculture system. And they are only 3% effective at converting nutrients and water into meat. And the way we make food is extremely inefficient. For every 100 pounds of stuff that we actually put in the cow, we only get 3% of it back. But no one realizes how terrible our food system actually is. In the world, 1 in 7 people do not have access to clean water, and 1 in 9 people do not have access to an adequate food source. And in the time you spend listening to my talk, 200 people will have died from hunger. And this has been happening for years, yet minimal progress has been made. And while countries are going day zero and people don't even have access to drinking water, we are using so many precious resources on growing food. 70% of the world's fresh water is being used for agriculture, and it takes more than 2,400 gallons of water just to produce 1 pound of beef. And to put that into perspective, that's 10 years worth of drinking water, 1,900 toilet flushes, and 141 showers. And oh yeah, that's actually 1.5 of these, 1.5 of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So when you're throwing away or eating your hamburger, you're basically dumping a whole swimming pool worth of water away. And to make matters worse, for that 1 pound of beef, 64 square feet of habitable land is used up, and 0.126 pounds of methane, which is a gas 20 times more potent than CO2, is produced. And with the world population rising to a shocking 10 billion people by 2050, there will be 7.3 billion meat eaters that we need to feed. And if we want to reduce the effects of climate change, we need to get the rest of the world on board, and fast. But the problem is, people love meat. It tastes really good, and the likelihood of us convincing the entire world to convert to veganism or get off meat is incredibly low. But I have a solution for that. And this solution will give us crazy benefits. It will require 98% less water, emits 97% less greenhouse gases, and uses up 99% less land. And this technology will allow us to solve 25% of the factors contributing to climate change. And the solution is cellular agriculture. Cellular agriculture is the production of meat products from cell cultures. It allows us to produce things that would otherwise come from traditional agriculture, but in a lab. So essentially, we can make beef without actually needing the cow and get eggs without needing the chicken. Cellular agriculture is split into 2 categories. The first one is the production of living or once living cells like meat, leather, and fur. And the second is acellular agriculture, which produces products without any living material. So there we can get eggs, milk, and vanilla. But how do we actually get beef without a cow? Well, to make cellular products, we need to make tissues. Our bodies are made of tissues, which are just a bunch of cells strung together. And how do we make tissues? I like to think of it kind of like growing a tree. In order to grow a tree, you take the seeds, give it the right nutrients, and you give it the right structure, and it will become a really beautiful final product. Except instead of seeds, we take stem cells, which are the starting point for growing meat in a petri dish. So a stem cell is an unspecialized type of cell which has an ability to self-renew and differentiate into different cell types. So stem cells are taken from the animal through a biopsy, which is just a process where a sample of tissue is taken harmlessly. And the location of the original muscle biopsy determines the taste of the meat. So we know we need to take small myosatellite stem cells and differentiate them into muscle tissue. But only using stem cells alone, we encounter a challenge, and that something is called cellular senescence, which is where the cells stop dividing after a certain number of divisions. And at this Hayflick limit, the cell's telomeres are too short to divide again, which means our meat plant will just reach a growth stunt, and our stem cells will stop dividing well before our meat has formed. But to get over this, we throw in a serum, which I like to call our magic potion, and it nourishes the cells with the right ratios of sugars, fats, proteins, and vitamins. And we also give it a bunch of different growth factors and hormones to encourage them to keep growing and proliferating. And these growth factors are usually added with the growth media. The most popular growth medium is fetal bovine serum, or FBS. And it is a growth media created by drawing blood from a baby cow. So FBS stops cell death because it contains the growth factors needed to convince the cells that they need to keep living and growing. So you can basically toss any type of cell into a petri dish with FBS and it will grow. But even if you have cells and the growth media, you'll still only get meat mush. You need something to give the cells the structure that they need in order to grow into something resembling meat texture. And that something is a scaffold. So the scaffold acts as the glue that holds all the stem cells together into a certain shape. So examples of this could be decellularized plant tissue, chitin, or collagen. And they give it the right environmental cues so that the cells arrange themselves in the perfect structure. And once the stem cells start growing in our cell flasks, they are transferred to a bioreactor, which is essentially a machine that provides the cells the right environmental triggers, such as temperature and exercise, which helps them keep reproducing. And our little stem cell babies will then grow and give us meat. So when the cells are given the right nutrients and environment, one stem will turn into two, the two stem cells will turn into four, four into 8, and so on, until you get myoblasts, which are these little beads of meat. And the myoblasts will join together and they'll make myotubes. And those will come together, and then finally you have your beautiful piece of meat. And the concept itself is pretty simple. You just take the stem cells, you give them the right growth media, you attach them to a scaffold, you put them in the right environment so that they can become meat. And just like how you can grow skin for burn victims or organs for patients, you can do the same things with stem cells, only with meat. But unfortunately, even if we get rid of all the inefficiencies that would come from cows, we don't actually solve all of our food problems. We still need to address our next friend. And I like to call it something I like to call the chicken. So the chickens are extremely inefficient at converting resources into eggs. And chicken cells ferment only 3% of nutrients into protein required to make egg whites. And we need 24 billion chickens in the world to produce enough eggs for us to eat. But we can actually make the same proteins in a more efficient mechanism, which is yeast. We can get eggs and milk through a much more sustainable process called acellular agriculture. And how do we do that? Well, first, we genetically engineer yeast to contain the DNA that chickens need to produce egg whites. And we feed sugars to the yeast so that it ferments and produces the exact same egg white proteins as chickens, but only in a more efficient way. And once we've made the egg white proteins, we can add water and we get our egg whites. And we can also do the same thing with milk. We insert cow DNA into the yeast, and it serves as a blueprint to produce the same to know how to produce the same proteins as a cow. And the genetically modified yeast is then fed sugar so that it produces the same exact proteins. And let me break this process down. So essentially, the yeast converts sugar to casein and whey in the right the right environments. And since the yeast has the blueprint on how to create the right milk proteins, because it has the cow DNA, it is able to produce these proteins, which are then used as a base to create other dairy products. And the proteins are then separated from the yeast and used to produce your favorite dairy products. And an example of a company already doing this is Perfect Day. It's already on the market, and they've already been able to transform all these ideas into a real product. They have been able to create real whey proteins and even ice cream from just yeast. And now that we've cut out all or most of the agriculture vacuums in our food system, we are able to solve almost 25% of climate change. And you can still have your precious meat, eggs, ice cream, and cheese at the same time. Using cellular and acellular agriculture, we'll be able to produce the same products and even arguably healthier products, since we don't need any antibiotics or hormones, with a more efficient machine. We will be able to use 98% less water, 99% less land, and emit 97% less greenhouse gases. And in the future, cultured products will slowly be available on your grocery shelves and will change the world one cell at a time. Thank you.
Yay! That was so inspiring. I'm looking at everyone, in the chat, and they're loving it. Yes, you crushed that. So yeah, it's such a great way to end the talks off. Your analogies were it just made everything make sense. I'm pretty sure it's really hard to just consume a lot of information within 10 to 15 minutes, right? But because of your analogies, just my brain is shining right now. But yeah, thank you so much, Kimberly. And any questions for Kimberly? Kawtar says, I used to be a vacuum friend.
Yeah.
But yes. Any questions for Kimberly? Well, we'll take a minute. But yeah, Kimberly, I wanted to ask you too. How'd you get into cellular agriculture? Tell us about it.
Well, I actually got through it with this Explorer that we did on TKS. So for people who aren't in TKS, essentially an Explorer is where you just dive into a bunch of these emerging technologies. And I've always been really into food. I'm a big foodie. I was into nutrition for a while. So, yeah, I mean, everyone likes food. So I was okay, I didn't realize that our agriculture system was so flawed. Imagine if we had to dump a whole swimming pool every time we ate something else. No one else would accept that, in other industry where we would just dump so much water and it's considered normal. So I was why do we have this? Why isn't there a technology for this? And I came across cellular agriculture, talked to a bunch of industry experts in the field, and everyone was super nice. So I got super into it, and yeah, I'm just still working on it still. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so excited to, see what you come up with in the future, and how, potentially maybe you could make a career out of that as well if you're really interested in it. So we got a lot of questions in the chat, so I'm just going to go one by one. So Kawtar also asked, how can the youth get involved in cellular agriculture? What are some tips for people who want to get involved and who want to solve, environmental crisis?
Yeah, so what I did personally is I looked at the organizations. There's a bunch of nonprofits. So there's New Harvest, there's Cell Canada, there's Cell Agri, and I contacted all of them, talked to people in the field, and I also signed up for all the newsletters. So I was able to actually keep myself in the loop and understand what was going on. So I signed up for all of those, and eventually, after writing some articles, talking to some people, you kind of just bump shoulders with these really amazing people and learn about these technologies. So one of them that I talked to was Future Fields, and they're actually they have this alternative to FBS already, which Ethan, I saw your question. I'll get to it, but yeah. So you kind of just, if you sign up for these opportunities, I know Cell Canada has volunteer opportunities. So if you do end up talking to them, everyone's super nice. Show your ambition, show your ideas, talk to people, and yeah, you'll get involved.
Yeah, I mean, Kimberly brings up a great point. I know Samson talked about, being ambitious and not, letting your fears come. But this is exactly the example. If you want to make change, you should be the one taking the first step. And then also, create movement. And I think, your tips were great. So yeah, next question's from Clara. She asked, do you know anything about what the effects of cellular agriculture will be on farmers and the farming industry?
Yeah, so the farmers and like the farming industry, a lot of them are against cellular agriculture, obviously, because it might run the risk of them like losing their jobs or there's currently a labeling war. So it's like, can you actually call cell egg meat? Because technically you didn't actually like butcher an animal. So there's farmers don't really want people in cell egg to call it meat because they don't want like their products essentially replacing what they already have just because of like an economic incentive. So I can see like farmers and the farming industry definitely getting upset, but like ultimately it's in the hands of the consumer. So if the consumers like it, if it tastes good, if it's better for the environment, and I know a lot of like young people are really interested in eating sustainably, I think cell egg is really the way to go. And I think like the farmers in the farming industry will just have to adapt and maybe find other ways. Like they can maybe learn skills to get technologies. Vertical farming is another big one. So I think they'll be able to adapt, but initially it might be a little bit difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I really agree. Like, I think for any technology that really comes into our world, there will be a loss of jobs, right? And there will be a gain of jobs. So it's kind of like, there's a give and take there. But I also feel like you said, these farmers, you never know. These farmers might, be trained to actually work in lab, right?
Yeah.
And, preserve their jobs somehow by engaging in cellular agriculture. So, I mean, we'll let the future show us. But yeah, Ian, I think, who's next? No, Eason asked, since FBS is so expensive and ethically questionable, what are some potential alternatives for it?
Yeah, so there's a couple. You actually don't necessarily need FBS per se. There's other like alternatives. One of them is like soybean lecithin. There's some vegan ones, but they're actually more expensive than FBS. So we're trying like one of the biggest challenges in cell egg is getting it to be scalable and like cheap. So some companies, like I mentioned, Future Fields, they're actually like really close. Their products coming out soon. Can't talk about it because yeah, it's like they wouldn't let me like wouldn't really like tell me much about it since they're still releasing it. But yeah, there's definitely companies developing alternatives, and it's coming soon. The only problem with soybean lecithin, which is like a current one that's really popular right now, is it's only specific for certain like cell types. So you can only give it to certain muscle cells, and then you have to give like a different type to fat cells and all of that. So you have to do everything separately and compile it. But I'm pretty sure Future Fields has developed the solution. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So finally, Ian asks, when do you think our grocery stores will be filled with cellular agricultural meat?
I'm thinking for like things that are simpler, like chicken nuggets or like sausages, those kind of things where it's not as like structurally complex. I'm thinking in the next like five years, because in Singapore actually this year, it was in January, like the company Just Eat, they released their chicken nuggets, and it's actually like a product right now. So a lot of companies are signing deals with like McDonald's or other big brands. So I think it'll be out pretty soon. It's just a matter of like how we can scale it and produce a lot but cheap.
Yeah, and I'm sure our society needs to adapt to that. I'm sure like a lot of consumers are going to have to make a lot of switches, right? But yeah, Margaret asked, what are the issues in getting this more mainstream?
Yeah, so one of them is like consumer acceptance. Some people like they're put off by the idea of possibly, especially for like acellular, having like the genetically modified thing. That's like a big debate that's been happening for like years. Other ones would be like if people are upset, there's like an ethical debate if whether you should like take the cells away from the animals. So that's like the consumer side. Some people like disagree with that, especially people who are really like passionate about like ethics. They might not really like it. But to me personally, I think that cell egg is better than like killing the animal itself, since you don't have to they're not actually harmed by the biopsy, and then you can keep like reproducing the cells with just one animal. As for like other things, there's like economics, legal things, regulations, like FDA and USDA things that still need to be passed. But yeah.
And I'm scrolling. Yeah, Ian asked, how do you think cost will compare? For example, will a pound of beef would it be like 2 times the price?
I'm thinking, okay, so the first one, this first like beef burger that was made was like in 2016 by Memphis Meats. It was super expensive, like $300,000 for the beef. But now I'm pretty sure it's only like 2 times or 3 times the cost. But I'm thinking with like the reduction of FBS and also getting bigger bioreactors so you can produce more, like you mass produce these things, the price will be pretty similar. I'm thinking like it'll just be a little more expensive, like kind of the price matching the price of like antibiotic free meat or that kind of idea. So I think it's definitely competitive.
Yeah, no, Ian was like, I was laughing at his comment. But yeah, Ethan also asked, how much will the energy cost increase? It takes a lot of energy to run facilities and bioreactors. So how does the energy consumption compare with traditional methods?
Well, for traditional methods, you do still have to like go through a processing area. Like you definitely do still, like for milk, you have to still like process the milk and all of that. So it's like similar. I would say maybe it's a little bit more since you have to power the bioreactors. And that's definitely a challenge that is still in the field, like trying to get all these like energy efficient bioreactors, but have more meat produced in each one. I think the energy costs ultimately, like if cell egg were to be a big thing, it would be because the cost came down. So I'm thinking like hopefully in the future it won't, but I'm not like 100%. I can't really predict how it's gonna go.
Yeah. So I think this is our last question. So from Gurpreet, is the cultured meat derived from stem cells biologically the same as meat from cows, as in they contain the same naturally produced nutrients that are sought after? And if not, how do you overcome that?
Yeah, so for the meat specifically, we can actually make them more nutritious. Like it really depends on what you put for the growth media and like the vitamins, proteins, and like fats. So as long as you get the right ratio, it'll provide the same exact nutrients with the same exact like muscle tissue. But some companies are working on making it more healthy or like give you more protein and all those things. So it really just like becomes it's like a craft. It gives you more control, cell eggs, so you can kind of make it what you want.
Cool. So I think that is the end of our questions. So I just wanted to say before we do end, if you are new here and you're not sure what COI is, COI stands for Cleaner Oceans Institute, and we are a global youth-led organization, and we are acting now to combat the environmental crisis at hand and through intersectional means. And so our goal is to spread awareness and educate our audience about what is really going on in the world while doing our best to provide assistance at countering the climate crisis through fundraising, policy-oriented work, donations, and much more. So if you're an activist and is interested in joining the team, you could fill out the interest form in the comments that I will drop in a few seconds, and we will contact you further. But yes, to everyone who came to the event, thank you so much for coming. The speakers and the audience, and especially like the audience, like you guys really made like tonight or the morning, wherever you are, really exciting and enthusiastic. And so I'm so grateful to have that support here. This was our first series, and this will not be the last. So make sure, if you want to hear from us, from our newsletters about new events, opportunities, make sure to fill out the form in the chat, and we will email you about them directly into your inbox. So it is sad that we have to end this, but we will see you soon. Thank you so much for coming. If you want to learn more about the speakers, we will also be including some information about that in our upcoming newsletter, which will be sent to your inbox as long as you fill out that form. But yes, thank you everyone for, yes, of course, I love organizing this. I loved working with the speakers. And so, yeah, thank you so much, you guys, for coming. It really makes my day, and I'm looking forward to the next COI talks. So yeah, I'll catch you all soon. If you want to stay around and ask questions about either TKS, COI, even talk to some of the speakers that are still on the call, you can stay around. But yeah, other than that, have a great rest of your day. Bye.